3 days before Thanksgiving, my son called and said 7 words that erased everything I believed about being a father. Don't come home. My wife doesn't want you here. So I spent the holiday alone in a restaurant staring at a plate of food I couldn't taste. Halfway through the meal, a quiet, elderly woman walked up to my table and asked if I wanted to join her family. I said yes, thinking it was just an act of kindness. I had no idea my life was about to split in two at that exact moment. 5 years later, my son stood in front of me screaming, and only then did I understand what that invitation had truly set in motion. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to listen to this story. Please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd truly love to connect with you. Also, a quick note, this story includes a few fictional elements added to enhance storytelling and learning. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental, but the message itself is completely true. My name is Stephen Hayes, and I had just turned 56 that fall. I'm 61 now, telling you this with 5 years of clarity I didn't have back then. I've spent most of that time learning how to disappoint people. It's a skill I've perfected over decades, the way certain words make someone's face close, off the way silence can fill a room with all the things you've failed to be. On Thanksgiving, sitting alone in a restaurant in Austin, Texas, a city I'd moved to just a year ago, looking for a fresh start. I learned something new, how to disappoint yourself. The restaurant smelled like turkey and baked apples. Everywhere I looked, there were families. Real families. A man in the corner booth was carving a turkey, while his grandchildren watched wide-eyed. 2 tables over an elderly couple held hands across their plates. In the center of the room, a woman was laughing at something her daughter said, a genuine sound, the kind that fills a space with light. I was alone. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Derek called. My son's voice came through the phone like a stranger's, clipped, formal, uncomfortable. Derek, hi. How are you? I kept my voice neutral, careful. Look, I don't have a lot of time, he said, cutting through the pleasantries. I'm calling because I need something from you. Something important. My stomach dropped. I knew this voice. This was the voice he'd used when he was about to ask me for something impossible. Okay, what do you need? Ty, Rebecca and I have been investing in a business opportunity, Derek said. A tech startup with serious potential. We need another investment to keep it going. The investors are circling, and if we don't come through, the whole thing collapses. I listened. I need $50,000, Derek said. I need it by the end of June. That's 6 weeks. You just sold that house in Connecticut. You have it. There was no question in his voice, no asking. He was stating facts like my money was already his. Derek, I started. Before you say no, he cut me off. If this company goes under, Rebecca and I lose everything. Our savings, our retirement plan, everything. You have the means to help us. Behind him, I could hear Rebecca's voice, muffled but insistent, coaching him. I don't think giving you $50,000 is the right thing to do, I said carefully. I don't know anything about this investment. Have you talked to a financial advisor? This isn't about what sounds risky to you, Derek said, and now his voice had an edge. This is about whether you actually give a shit, or if everything you've said about trying to have a relationship is just empty words. I closed my eyes. I was standing in the bookstore surrounded by books, and my son was using guilt as a weapon. Derek, I care about you, but I don't think giving you $50,000 is the right thing to do. I think you should talk to a professional. You think what? He interrupted. You think you know better than me after you walked out on your own family, after you abandoned Mom and moved across the country. I didn't abandon anyone, I said, and my voice was steady. I left a marriage that wasn't working. I've stayed in contact with Rachel. I've tried to maintain a relationship with you even though you've consistently rejected my efforts. Yeah, because you owe us, Derek said. You owe Mom. You owe me. You don't get to just walk away and start over like nothing happened. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about William. I thought about Rachel, who'd stayed in touch without making me feel like I owed her. I thought about Sunday dinners and people who showed up for each other without keeping score. Actually, I said quietly, that's exactly not how family works. Family isn't about debt. It's not about owing each other. It's about showing up for each other. And Derek, you're not showing up for me. You're calling to demand money, and when I ask reasonable questions, you're attacking me for things I did years ago. So that's a no. His voice was quiet now, but underneath the quiet was something vicious. That's a no, I confirmed. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. I could hear Rebecca in the background saying something angry. Then Derek spoke, and his words were deliberate, enunciated clearly. Then consider yourself dead to me. You're not my father anymore. You don't exist in my life. Don't call me, don't text me, don't try to contact me again. As far as I'm concerned, you're gone. Derek, I tried, but he'd already hung up. I stood in the bookstore, phone still in my hand. I didn't feel anger. I felt something quieter. Relief. I didn't know how to be his father in the way he needed. But I realized, standing there among the books, that I didn't have to be. I had Sunday dinners with Eleanor and William. I had a daughter in Rachel who loved me. I had a life in Austin that was small but real and genuine. Derek could declare me dead, but I'd never felt more alive. That evening, I called Rachel. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Dad, I'm proud of you. You set a boundary with him. You protected yourself. That's not selfish. That's healthy." After we hung up, I sat on my apartment couch in the gathering darkness and let myself cry. Not from grief, but from the strange relief of finally letting go. Before Thanksgiving, I'd tried to build a bridge. Not to Derek exactly, but to the idea of Derek. To the son I'd once known before distance and resentment had turned him into a stranger. It started with a phone call to Rachel 3 weeks earlier. "I'm thinking about visiting Derek," I'd said, testing the words. "Maybe fly back to Connecticut for a long weekend. See if things have settled down between us." There was a pause. Rachel was good at pauses. They meant she was choosing her words carefully. "Dad, I don't know if that's a good idea right now," she'd finally said. "Derek's been difficult. Rebecca's been in his ear. But I was 55 then, still believing that proximity could fix things. That if I just showed up in person, looked Derek in the eye, I could explain myself. So I'd booked a flight for early December, Austin to Hartford. 4 hours there, a weekend with Derek, back by Sunday night. I'd also done something else, sold the house in Connecticut. It had taken 3 months of realtor open houses negotiations. But I'd finally let go of that place. The house where Derek and Rachel had grown up. Where I'd thought I was building something permanent. Where everything had eventually collapsed. The sale closed in October. After paying off the mortgage and commission, I walked away with $273,000. It was a strange amount of money to have suddenly. Not wealth, but security. I'd moved most of it into a savings account I barely touched, living off what little I'd saved from my old job. But knowing I had that money changed something. It meant I didn't have to stay small anymore. I could afford to take risks. I could afford to fly across the country. I could afford to try repairing what I'd broken. So I'd booked the flight. December 14th through 17th. I'd taken time off work. I'd even bought Derek a gift, a watch, something I thought might appeal to him, something that said I'd been thinking about what he might want. I was 55 then. 56 by the time everything changed. Then came Thanksgiving and Eleanor Patterson's unexpected kindness. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe there was something here in Austin worth staying for. that maybe I didn't have to chase ghosts in Connecticut. But Derek was still my son. The trip was still booked. So after Thanksgiving, I called Derek. "Hey, I was wondering if we could talk about something," I said when he answered. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" "I booked a flight to Connecticut," I said. "Early December. I'd really like to see you. I know things have been strained, but—" "Oh, Dad." His voice carried that familiar quality, the one that suggested he was about to disappoint me. "Rebecca and I are going to be really busy that weekend. It's the holidays. We have parties, family stuff." "It's okay if Rebecca's busy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came to see you. We could just grab dinner, or—" "I don't think this is a good time," Derek said, the door closing. Again. "Tricka sold the house," I said. It came out too fast, like I was offering him something when really I was just explaining the hole I was standing in. "I closed on it in October. I have the money now to help you if you need it." "I said it's not a good time," Derek repeated, and now there was an edge to his voice. "Why do you keep pushing?" I hung up after that. I couldn't remember what else we'd said. Just the click of the phone ending and the silence that followed. I went back to my apartment that night and sat on the couch in the darkness. I kept the flight booked for 3 more days before I finally called the airline and canceled it. I took the cancellation fee, $80, like a small punishment I deserved. But the gift was still in the box on my shelf. The watch. Expensive. Useless now. I thought about what it meant to have money and no one to spend it on. I thought about what it meant to have a son who didn't want to see me no matter how far I was willing to travel. I thought about the house I'd sold, the furniture I'd left behind, the photographs and memories I'd tried to escape by moving to Austin, and I realized something. I was running from Connecticut, but I was also running towards something. I just didn't know what yet. That's when I remembered Eleanor Patterson, the kindness in her eyes, the way she'd simply decided I mattered. The bookstore was quiet the next morning. I shelved books and helped customers find what they were looking for. And for the first time since I'd sold the house, since I'd booked and canceled that flight, since Derek had rejected me for the 100th time, I thought maybe I'd been looking in the wrong direction all along. Maybe home wasn't Connecticut. Maybe home wasn't something you built with people who didn't want to build with you. Maybe home was something else entirely. Something you found in the kindness of strangers. Something you were offered when you least expected it. Sunday came, my usual day off, and I did something I hadn't done since arriving in Austin. I called Eleanor Patterson. My 55th birthday had been a quiet affair. I was hoping he might want to fly down to Austin. We hadn't been close, but he was my son, and I still held on to the belief that if I tried hard enough, if I showed up consistently, maybe he'd show up too. "Dad," he'd said over the phone, and I could hear Rebecca in the background. "I'm sorry, but Rebecca's mother is having some health issues, and we promised to help her out that week. It's not a great time for me to travel." "Oh," I'd said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Of course. Family first. I understand." But even as I said it, I felt the lie settle into my chest. Derek had never shown up for me on my birthday. Not once. There had always been some excuse: work, Rebecca, money problems, timing. The excuses changed, but the result was always the same. I spent my birthdays alone. My 55th birthday was no different. I'd ordered Chinese takeout and sat in my apartment watching television. No cake. No celebration. Around 9 p.m., Derek texted, "Happy birthday, Dad. Sorry I can't be there." Rain check. There would never be a rain check. We both knew that. But I responded anyway. "No problem. Thanks for the message. Love you." He never responded to that. That night, I sat on my couch and thought about what 55 years of life had actually taught me. I'd spent more than half a decade on this earth, and what did I have to show for it? A son who didn't want to spend time with me. A daughter I barely knew. A career that had provided a paycheck but never fulfillment. An apartment that echoed with emptiness. I thought about all the birthdays before this one. The ones where I'd tried too hard, planned too much, hoped too desperately that this would be the year Derek would actually care. The ones where I'd accepted the rejection with grace and moved on to the next disappointment. I thought about the pattern I'd let establish itself. I would reach out. Derek would decline. I would accept it. And then I would do it all over again the next time. It was exhausting. It was heartbreaking. And I had no idea how to stop doing it. 3 months later, on Thanksgiving, Derek called again. This time the excuse was different, but the message was the same. Dad, Rebecca doesn't think it's a good idea if you come over. She says it would be complicated, and that's when something shifted. Maybe it was because I'd just spent my birthday alone. Maybe it was because I'd hit 55 and realized I was running out of time to be someone other than the man who kept hoping for scraps of affection from people who weren't capable of giving it. Maybe it was just that I'd finally had enough. Whatever it was, I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince Derek that I belonged in his house at his table in his life. I just accepted it. Okay, I said, I understand. And then I hung up and made a reservation at a restaurant. Because I'd decided something. If my family didn't want me, I would find other people who did. Later, sitting at the Pattersons' table on that first Sunday dinner, Eleanor asked me about my family. I found myself telling her about Derek, about Rebecca, about the birthday I'd spent alone just 3 months earlier. He called to apologize that day, I told her. A text message at 9 p.m. But it wasn't really an apology. It was just a habit. Something he felt obligated to do. Eleanor reached across the table and took my hand. His loss, Stephen, she said simply. His loss. And I realized, sitting there with this woman I'd just met, that she was right. Derek had chosen absence. He'd chosen to skip my birthday. He'd chosen to keep me at arm's length. He'd chosen money and comfort and a life where his father was an inconvenience. That was his choice. And I was finally, at 55 years old, ready to stop paying the price for it. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I sat there for another minute or two, the apartment completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. The plane ticket was still in my hand. The wrapped gifts were still on my kitchen counter. The life I'd been planning was still available to me. All I had to do was get on that plane and show up. But I couldn't. Not after what Derek had just said. Not after understanding what I'd been refusing to see for so long. I picked up my phone. Rachel answered on the second ring. She always did. My daughter had a way of making me feel like I mattered, like my call was the most important thing happening in her world at that moment. Are you okay? Your voice sounds... I'm fine, I said, but I wasn't. And somehow Rachel knew that already. What happened? So I told her. About Derek's call. About the 7 words. About the plane ticket that was now worthless. About the gifts I'd bought with such hope just hours ago. Rachel listened without interrupting. That was one of the things I loved about her. She actually listened. She didn't jump in with advice or try to fix things. She just let you say what you needed to say, and then she reacted honestly. When I finished, there was a pause. Dad, she said carefully, Derek didn't make that decision. What do you mean? I mean, Rebecca made that decision. Derek's just the messenger. You know how he is, he always does whatever she tells him to do. I thought about that. About all those conversations with Derek where he'd started sentences with Rebecca thinks or Rebecca wants. About how he'd spent the last few years becoming less himself and more a proxy for his wife's opinions and preferences. I know, I said quietly. It's not fair. Rachel continued, her voice getting a little heated now. Derek's a grown man. He should be able to make his own decisions about whether he wants his father at his Thanksgiving dinner. but he let her decide for him. He always lets her decide. I can't change that, I said, and I meant it. There was nothing I could do to make Derek see what he was doing to himself. Nothing I could do to make him stand up to Rebecca. Nothing I could do to save him from his own choices. No, Rachel agreed. You can't. We sat with that truth for a moment. So what are you going to do? She asked. That was the question, wasn't it? I had a few options. I could sit at home and feel sorry for myself. I could spend the day alone in my apartment staring at the worthless plane ticket and the unused gifts. I could call Derek back and demand an explanation, or beg him to reconsider, or let myself spiral into anger and resentment. Or I could do something different. I'm not going to let them ruin my day, I said. The words came out before I'd fully thought them through, but as soon as I said them, I knew they were true. What do you mean? Rachel asked. I mean, I'm going to Thanksgiving dinner, just not with them. Dad, I don't think, not with family, just somewhere. Somewhere that's open. Somewhere that serves a good meal and has other people around. Somewhere that feels like something other than this apartment. I could almost hear Rachel nodding on the other end of the line. That's actually a great idea, she said. You shouldn't spend Thanksgiving alone just because Derek and Rebecca are being assholes. I smiled despite myself. Rachel had never been one to mince words. Exactly, I said. There has to be restaurants open on Thanksgiving in Austin, she said, thinking out loud. Good ones. You could make a reservation, make a whole thing of it. Treat yourself. Maybe, I said. Dad, seriously. You deserve to have a good day. You deserve to celebrate. Don't let them steal that from you. After we hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment. I thought about Derek. I thought about Rebecca. I thought about the years of small choices that had led to this moment, the moment where my son had decided his wife was more important than his father. It hurt. It definitely hurt. But Rachel was right. I didn't have to let that hurt define my day. I didn't have to sit at home and stew in it. I didn't have to let Derek and Rebecca's decision become my tragedy. I stood up. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out a nice shirt. Nothing fancy, but something that felt a little special. I changed out of the t-shirt and jeans I'd been wearing all day. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. When had I gotten so small? When had I started accepting less than I deserved? Then I walked to my closet and grabbed my jacket. The Austin evening was just starting to cool down as I opened the door to my apartment. The sun was hanging low in the sky, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. There were people out on the streets, families walking together, groups of friends heading out to dinner, kids running ahead of their parents. I looked at all those people living their lives, making their choices, and I made mine. I wasn't going to sit at home and wait for Derek to call back and apologize. I wasn't going to spend Thanksgiving feeling sorry for myself. I wasn't going to let the rejection of my son and his wife define how I spent this day. I locked the door behind me and headed toward the street. Somewhere in Austin, there was a restaurant open on Thanksgiving. Somewhere there were people sharing a meal. Somewhere there was a chance for something unexpected to happen. And I was going to find it. After Thanksgiving dinner at the Patterson table, I didn't want to leave. This wasn't the polite reluctance of someone whose host was being generous. This was the desperate clinging of a man who'd just experienced something he didn't know existed. The warmth, the noise, the way people moved around each other with genuine affection, not obligation. When the meal finally wound down and dessert was being cleared, Eleanor leaned over to me. "Stephen," she said, her voice soft but direct. "Do you have plans for next Sunday?" I almost laughed. Plans? My Sundays were empty. They were all empty. My weeks were empty. My life was empty. But I just shook my head. "No, ma'am, no plans?" "Then come to our house," she said. It wasn't a question. "We have dinner every Sunday. Family tradition. Nothing fancy. Just a meal together. William always overestimates how much food to cook, so there's always too much. You should help us eat it. William, who'd been listening from across the table, smiled and nodded. She's right. And the leftovers sit in the fridge getting wasted. You'd actually be doing us a favor. I didn't believe them. People don't invite strangers to their homes out of genuine need. But I also didn't argue. Because the alternative was going back to my apartment. Back to the silence and the empty walls and the weight of all my failures. Okay, I said. Thank you. I'd like that. 6 o'clock, Eleanor said. North Austin near Brushy Creek. I'll write down the address for you. Eleanor pulled out a small pen and a receipt from her purse, the kind of thing a woman her age would carry. She wrote the address in careful handwriting and handed it to me. I looked at it, an address I didn't know, in a neighborhood I hadn't explored, in a city I was still learning to navigate. I don't have your number, Eleanor said, but you don't need it. Just come. 6 o'clock this Sunday. I nodded, folding the address carefully and putting it in my wallet. The drive home that Thanksgiving night was different than I'd expected. Usually driving alone through Austin at night felt like drifting through a city that didn't know I existed. But tonight, it felt like moving towards something rather than away from it. I thought about Eleanor's invitation. I thought about the way William had nodded in agreement, like they'd already discussed this, like they'd already decided I was worth inviting into their home. I thought about Rachel, my own daughter, who I'd carefully kept at arm's length to protect her from the burden of my neediness. And then I thought about this stranger who'd barely known my name an hour ago and had decided that I should be part of her Sunday. The bookstore the next morning felt different. I shelved books and helped customers find what they were looking for, but my mind was elsewhere. I was counting down days until Sunday. I was wondering what to expect. I was for the first time in months looking forward to something. Saturday morning, I did something I hadn't done since moving to Austin. I went shopping. Not for groceries, I was careful with money, still adjusting to the strange reality of having savings. But I bought a bottle of wine from the store where I'd started to recognize the owner's face. Something decent, not expensive, but thoughtful. I bought flowers from a grocery store stand. They felt too feminine somehow, too much. But I bought them anyway. And then I second-guessed myself and almost returned them. But I kept them. Saturday night I laid out my clothes for Sunday, the way I used to do when Derek was small and we had somewhere important to go. I pressed a shirt. I polished my shoes. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in years. This mattered. I didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. Sunday morning came early. I had the address written down, but I still pulled it up on my phone's GPS to make sure I understood how to get there. North Austin. It was a drive I'd made vaguely before, but never with purpose, never with a destination that mattered. I arrived at 5:47 p.m. I sat in my car for 10 minutes holding the wine and flowers, trying to calm my breathing. This was ridiculous. I was a 56-year-old man about to have dinner with a family I'd met once. It was a kindness, nothing more. I shouldn't expect anything from it. But I did. I expected something. I expected maybe to feel less alone. I expected maybe to find some small corner of belonging, even if it was temporary. At 5:57, I got out of the car and walked to the front door. Eleanor answered before I could knock, like she'd been expecting me. I would later learn she almost didn't stand up that night, almost didn't extend that invitation. She sat there for a full minute at the Thanksgiving table, hesitating. What if he said no? What if it was awkward? What if she was overstepping? But then William nudged her under the table, caught her eye, and nodded like he was saying, "Go. Trust your instinct." So she did. "Stephen," she said now, smiling. "You came. Come in, come in." I handed her the wine and flowers, suddenly aware of how awkward I looked holding them. "Hi, these are beautiful," she said, and she meant it. I could tell by the way she held them, the way she looked at them. William, look what Stephen brought. And wine, perfect. We're going to love having you here. William appeared from somewhere deeper in the house and shook my hand. His grip was warm, his eyes steady. He looked at me like he was taking my measure, deciding something about my character, and then he nodded, small and almost imperceptible, like he'd reached a positive conclusion. Come on, he said. The table's already set. We're just waiting on David and Karen. They're bringing the kids. As I stepped into the Patterson house, I realized something. There had been no exchange of phone numbers, no awkward moment where we'd figured out how I'd contact them or how they'd contact me. Eleanor had simply invited me, given me an address, and expected me to show up. No safety net. No way to cancel easily. Just an invitation made in faith that I would come. It was the most trusting thing anyone had done for me in years. I thought I was handling it well. The mask was in place. I was smiling when I needed to smile, nodding at the right moments, playing the part of a man who had simply decided to treat himself to a nice Thanksgiving dinner alone. Nothing sad about it. Nothing broken. But then Eleanor saw the tears. I didn't even realize they were there until I felt the first one slide down my cheek. I tried to catch it before anyone noticed, lifting my napkin quickly, turning my face toward the window, like I was just looking at the city lights. But Eleanor had already seen. Of course she had. Women like Eleanor, the kind who spent a lifetime noticing things about people they didn't miss, moments like that. She said something to William. I caught the tail end of it. Just a minute, dear. Then she stood up from her table and walked over to mine with the kind of casual grace that made it seem completely natural. Like she wasn't about to walk into a stranger's private grief. You all right? She asked, gently pulling out the chair across from me without waiting for permission. I wiped my face quickly, forced a smile. The lie came automatic. Practiced even. Allergies, I said. The restaurant has something in the air, I think. Eleanor smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that believed me. See, Stephen, she said, and I was struck by how easily she used my name like we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Allergies don't usually make people cry on Thanksgiving. There was no judgment in her voice. Just a simple statement of fact. The kind of thing someone says when they've seen enough of the world to know the difference between a sneeze and heartbreak. I looked at her, really looked at her, and something in me just gave way. My son, I started, and then I couldn't finish. The words got stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth, caught in the tangle of everything I'd been trying not to feel. Eleanor reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was soft, but her grip was firm. Real. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, she said. But I want you to know that you shouldn't be alone right now. I don't. I swallowed hard. I don't really have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Eleanor said simply. And I'm choosing to invite you to sit with us, with our family, if you want to. I almost said no. Some part of me wanted to protect myself, to keep the wound private the way you're supposed to when you're a man of a certain age. We don't cry in public. We don't accept kindness from strangers. We handle our problems alone. But sitting there looking at this woman who barely knew me, but somehow understood everything, I realized that pride was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Okay, I said quietly. Yes. Thank you. Eleanor's smile widened. She stood up, extending her hand to help me up. I took it, grateful for the anchor, for the proof that I wasn't floating completely untethered. Come on, she said. I want you to meet everyone. The walk across the restaurant felt like it took hours. Like I was crossing some kind of threshold into a different version of my life. All around me, families were eating their meals, caught up in their own conversations. None of them noticed one man following an older woman to a different table. None of them understood that something important was happening. But I did. The Patterson table was in the center of the restaurant, a position of prominence, I realized. A table where people wanted to be seen. William looked up as we approached, his face breaking into an immediate smile. Beside him sat a man who had to be David. He had William's eyes, that same quiet strength. David's wife, Karen, was holding a young grandchild, probably not more than 3 years old, who immediately reached toward Eleanor with both arms. "Look who's joining us," Eleanor announced, pulling out a chair that somehow appeared to be waiting for me. "Everyone, this is Stephen Hayes. Stephen, this is my family." William stood up and shook my hand again, but this time it felt different, deeper, like he was welcoming me into something. David extended his hand across the table with a warm greeting. Karen smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from genuine kindness. The baby, blonde-haired and gap-toothed, waved at me with a tiny hand, and I found myself waving back. "Stephen, you sit right here," Eleanor said, pointing to the chair she'd pulled out. "Between me and William, we're just about to cut into the turkey, and I have to tell you it's one of the best I've had all year." I sat down, and something shifted inside my chest. It wasn't fixed. The pain was still there, still raw and real. But it was different now. Less like I was drowning and more like someone had thrown me a rope. The hostess came by quickly with an extra plate glass and silverware, like she'd been expecting me all along. Like somehow this had always been part of the plan. Eleanor began serving me turkey, and Karen leaned over to ask if I preferred my dressing with or without pecans. "With," I said, surprised that I remembered. "Good man," David said, and there was something in his tone that made me realize he meant it, that this wasn't pity. This was something else, something genuine. The baby reached over and grabbed my hand, examining my wedding ring with the fierce concentration of someone who found all human artifacts fascinating. He likes you," Eleanor observed. "Our baby usually takes a while to warm up to people, but something tells me you're different." I looked at this woman, this stranger, who had seen me broken in a restaurant and decided to do something about it. At William, who was now loading my plate with second helpings of things I hadn't even asked for. At David and Karen, who had welcomed me into their circle without hesitation. At the baby, who was still holding my hand. I thought about Derek's voice on the phone, about Rebecca's invisible presence between us, about all the ways I'd failed to be the father my son wanted. And then I looked at Eleanor again, and she winked at me. Just a small gesture, a flash of connection. But it was enough to tell me something I'd almost forgotten. Family wasn't just what you were born into. Sometimes it was what you built. Sometimes it was what found you when you were sitting alone in a restaurant on Thanksgiving, broken and bleeding and absolutely convinced that nobody cared. Sometimes family was just people seeing you and deciding that you mattered. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, 6 months after Thanksgiving. I was shelving new arrivals in the philosophy section when my phone buzzed, a number I recognized, but hadn't heard from in months. Derek. I almost didn't answer. For a moment I stood there between the Kierkegaard and the Sartre, my finger hovering over the screen. Around me, the bookstore hummed with its quiet afternoon rhythm, the soft turning of pages, the gentle tap of keyboards at the reading table, the occasional footfall on the worn wooden floor. This was my place now. Not just my workplace, but a place where I'd learned to exist without constantly defending my right to be here. I answered, "Dad." His voice carried something I couldn't quite name. Not warmth exactly, not coldness either. Something more fragile, more desperate. "How are you?" The politeness was strange. We exchanged brief pleasantries. How was Austin? How was the bookstore job? Fine, good, same. And I kept waiting for the real reason. Derek didn't call just to ask how I was. He hadn't in years. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe you could visit. Rebecca's mentioned it would be nice if we all got together. The kids have grown so much, and I felt something in my chest shift. Not hope, exactly. Caution. The bookstore suddenly felt very far away, even though I was still standing in it, my hand resting on a copy of Being and Nothingness. That would be nice, I said carefully. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, could sense him gathering something, courage, perhaps, or the momentum for what he'd actually called to ask. About that, he continued, things have gotten a bit tight financially. Rebecca and I invested in something, a tech venture. We thought it would take off, but... He trailed off, and I recognized this hesitation. This was the preamble, the setup. The thing is, we need some capital, just to keep it afloat through the summer. If we can get through the next quarter, I really think it's going to work. I said nothing. I was listening, but I was also listening to something else, to the part of me that had spent decades trying to solve Derek's problems, trying to prove my love through money, through availability, through the desperate hope that if I just did enough, sacrificed enough, he would finally see me as worthy of being called son. Eleanor had a way of looking at situations. She'd mentioned it during one of our Sunday dinners, the way William handled difficulty. He didn't rush to fix things. He stood still. He let people own their choices. How much did I asked? 50,000. The number hung there between us. I did the math quickly, the house sale, the retirement account, the modest safety net I'd built in these past 6 months. I had it. That was the terrible, beautiful part. I had it. I can't do that, I said. You don't understand. I do understand. I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I understand that you're scared. I understand that Rebecca is pressuring you, and maybe her father is too. I understand that this feels like an emergency. But Derek, I can't be the solution to this problem. He started to speak again, but I kept going. I've spent a long time trying to be the kind of father who could fix things with money, who could prove love through availability and sacrifice. And all it did was teach you that I was someone to ask when you needed something, not someone you wanted to know. There was silence on the other end of the line. A real silence, not a pause. That's not fair, he said finally. You left us in Connecticut, so... I know what I did, I said, and I own that. But I'm not going to keep paying the price for it by becoming the person who rescues you every time you make a choice you can't undo. That's not love, Derek. That's just enabling. It's just me avoiding the harder work of actually being present as your father, not your financial emergency contact. I thought of Eleanor's hesitation before she'd invited me to that first Sunday dinner. The way she'd stood at the threshold between charity and genuine connection. She'd chosen connection. She'd chosen to see me. If you want to talk about what you're going through, I'm here for that, I said. If you want advice about financial counselors or small business loans, I can help you find resources. But I'm not going to give you $50,000 and pretend that's the same as actually showing up for you. So that's it, you're done with me. The question cut through me as I suspect he knew it would. But something had changed. Eleanor was part of my life now. William, too. Rachel called me regularly. The bookstore had become a kind of sanctuary, not because it paid well, it didn't, but because the work itself was honest. I was learning to live in a different story about myself. No, I said quietly. But maybe we need to figure out a different kind of relationship. One where I'm not always trying to apologize for being your father, and you're not always trying to punish me for it. After we hung up, after he said nothing in response, just the soft click of disconnection, I stood in the philosophy section for a long time. A customer asked me where the poetry was, and I directed her automatically my mind elsewhere. I thought about the kind of man I'd become, about the difference between abandoning someone and setting a boundary, about how love sometimes looks like saying no. That evening, I called Eleanor to ask if I could bring wine to Sunday dinner. The parking lot was cool and quiet, the kind of November evening where the sky turns purple before it turns black. I sat in my car for a moment before turning on the engine, replaying the night in my mind. The Patterson family. Eleanor's hand on my arm, William's firm handshake, David's quiet strength, Karen's genuine warmth. The baby Marcus, they'd called him, sleeping peacefully against Eleanor's shoulder. For the first time in 56 years, I'd felt like I belonged somewhere. Eleanor had pressed something into my hand as we were leaving the restaurant. A business card, cream-colored simple. On the back, in Eleanor's careful handwriting, "We'd love to see you again, Stephen. Sunday dinner at 7 p.m. You're always welcome, E." The address was printed on the front, North Austin. A neighborhood I'd driven through 100 times in my 1 year living here. Close. Maybe 15 minutes from my apartment if traffic was light. I should have just driven there. I should have known Austin well enough after 1 year to navigate it without help. But my hands were shaking as I sat in the parking lot, and I realized I wasn't shaking from cold or fear. I was shaking because I was terrified I'd lose the address, that I'd drive the wrong direction, and somehow miss the only real invitation I'd received in years. So I pulled out my phone and typed the address into Google Maps. Not because I didn't know where North Austin was, but because I needed the GPS to do more than navigate. I needed it to hold me steady. I needed a voice artificial calm certain to tell me where to go. I needed the small blue dot on a map to prove that there was a destination waiting for me, that this wasn't a dream. The GPS calculated the route. 15 minutes. A left on Anderson Mill, a right on Brushy Creek. One more turn and I'd be there. I sat in my car for another minute, just breathing. Then I drove home to my empty apartment, parked in a space that nobody was waiting in, and went inside. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my bed and stared at the business card, making sure the address didn't change. Making sure Eleanor's handwriting was still there. Making sure it was real. The week crawled by. I worked my job, nothing glamorous, just enough to pay rent and sustain a life that didn't require much sustaining. I went to the grocery store. I came home. I sat with the business card on my nightstand and tried not to hope too hard that this wasn't some elaborate kindness that would disappear the moment I actually showed up at their door. Saturday night, I ironed a shirt. Sunday morning, I showered and shaved. I left my apartment at 6:30 p.m., driving slowly through Austin's Sunday evening traffic. The GPS guided me through familiar streets that suddenly felt new. I'd driven past these neighborhoods 1,000 times without ever really seeing them. Now every corner seemed to matter. At 6:55, I pulled up to the address. The house was warm and inviting, a 2-story colonial with lights glowing in every window. I could see movement inside, a family getting ready for dinner. People I'd met once briefly and yet were expecting me, had wanted me, had offered me a place. I sat in my car for 5 minutes. Then I walked to the door, raised my hand to knock, and hesitated. This was the moment where I could still turn around. This was still the moment where I could tell myself it had been a kind gesture, but not meant to be followed through on. This was still the moment where I could protect myself by refusing to hope. But then the door opened. Eleanor stood there in a warm sweater, her face lighting up the moment she saw me. "Stephen, I was hoping you'd come. Come in, come in. William's in the living room. Everyone's so excited to see you again." I stepped across the threshold into warmth, into noise, into a house full of people who were somehow inexplicably glad I was there. As I followed Eleanor toward the sound of voices and laughter and the smell of home-cooked food, I realized something. The GPS in my car wasn't just a navigation tool. It had been a lifeline. It had given me permission to believe I was going somewhere, that there was a destination, that I mattered enough to arrive at. That evening I learned that sometimes getting lost is necessary, and sometimes the only way to find your way home is to let yourself be guided. 6 months had passed since that first Thanksgiving dinner at the Patterson table. 6 months of every Sunday being the same, and yet never the same. Eleanor would call on Saturday to confirm, "You're coming tomorrow, right?" And I'd say yes, even though we both knew I would never miss it. The first Sunday after Thanksgiving had been the hardest. I'd driven to their house with my hands shaking, convinced that maybe the invitation had been a pity gesture. Maybe they'd regretted asking a stranger into their family dinner. Maybe this second Sunday would be the last. But Eleanor opened the door with a smile that erased every doubt. "You came back," she said, like it was the greatest gift. Come in, we've been waiting." After that, I stopped doubting. Every Sunday became a ritual. I'd leave my apartment at 6:15 p.m. I'd arrive at the Patterson house at 6:50 p.m. Eleanor would hug me at the door. William would shake my hand and ask about my week. David and Karen would already be there with Marcus, who'd started calling me Uncle Stephen somewhere around the third week. By month 2, I had a drawer in their guest bedroom. Just a small drawer, but it was mine. My clothes lived there. My toothbrush lived in their bathroom. There was a photo of me on their refrigerator between pictures of their grandchildren. I was becoming part of their family. By month 3, I'd stopped thinking of myself as a guest. I'd started making suggestions about dinner. Eleanor actually listened to me. I'd started helping William with projects around the house on Saturday afternoons. I'd started babysitting Marcus sometimes when David and Karen needed to go out. I was being integrated into their lives, and they were being integrated into mine. By month 4, something shifted inside me. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I stopped bracing myself for the moment they'd tell me this experiment in chosen family had run its course. I stopped preparing myself for disappointment. Instead, I started believing, truly believing, that this was real. Eleanor noticed. "You're different," she said to me one Sunday, as we were preparing dinner together in the kitchen. "You're lighter, like you're not carrying something so heavy anymore." "I think I'm starting to believe this is real," I admitted. "That you actually want me here." Eleanor set down her knife and took both my hands. "Stephen," she said, looking directly into my eyes, "we don't just want you here. We chose you. Every Sunday, we choose you. And we'll keep choosing you." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't look away. By month 5, something else happened. Rachel started calling me more frequently. Not just check-ins, but real conversations. She told me about work. She asked my advice on things. She told me she was seeing someone seriously, and she wanted me to meet him eventually. She said one Thursday evening, "I'm really happy. And a lot of that is because I can see you're happy. With the Pattersons, with your life. I've never seen you like this." I realized, listening to her, that I'd been so focused on Derek's rejection that I'd never fully acknowledged Rachel's acceptance. She'd never stopped believing in me. She'd just been waiting for me to believe in myself. By month 6, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt like home. Sunday dinners were sacred. I wouldn't miss one for anything. The Patterson family had become the structure that held my life together. They'd become the reason I got up in the morning. They'd become my purpose. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. That call didn't come after weeks of silence. It came after 5 full years of nothing. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to continue living in the peace I'd built over the past 6 months. But another part of me, the part that was still a father, still hoping against hope, made me pick up. "Hey, Dad," Derek said. His voice sounded different, strained, like he'd rehearsed this call 100 times. "Derek," I said carefully. "It's been a while." "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry about that. I've been thinking a lot. About us. about what happened between us. And I think I made a mistake, Dad. I think I was wrong to keep you at such a distance. My heart did something complicated. Hope and suspicion warred inside me. That's good to hear, I said slowly. I've missed you. I've missed you too, Derek said, and he sounded like he meant it. Actually, I was wondering if you might want to get together soon. Maybe this weekend I'd really like to talk to you about some things. Of course, I heard myself say. I'd like that. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a long time. The Patterson family had taught me what real love looked like. But Derek was still my son. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to change. I didn't know yet that he was already planning to ask me for $50,000. I didn't know yet that the next 6 months would involve coffee shops and phone calls and the final severing of a relationship that had never been real. All I knew was that I had 6 months of peace behind me, and I was about to lose it. But that evening, I called Eleanor. Because even before I understood what was coming, I knew who I needed to talk to. And when Eleanor asked what was wrong, I told her everything. About Derek, about the call, about my hope and my fear. Whatever happens, Eleanor said, you have us. You have this family. Remember that. And I held on to those words like a lifeline, because somehow I sensed I was going to need them. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of organizing the garage, something I'd been meaning to do for weeks, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had been relentless lately, and I'd gotten into the habit of screening calls. But something made me look at the screen. Derek! My heart stopped. Derek hadn't called in 6 months. 6 months of silence so complete it had almost felt normal. I'd built a life in that silence, a good life, a real life. But there was still a part of me that had never stopped waiting for this exact moment. I answered before I could overthink it. Hello, Dad. His voice was different, smaller somehow, younger. Hi, I wasn't sure if you'd answer. Derek. I set down the box I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. Hi, how are you? He took a breath. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really sorry. About everything. The things I said, the way I treated you. I was wrong. He stopped. Can we talk? Can I see you? I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. 6 months of silence followed by a sudden apology didn't feel like healing. It felt like timing. I wanted to say yes immediately. I wanted to hear him out, to let him explain, to believe that somehow we could fix this. That somehow we could go back to the way things were supposed to be, not great, but at least like we were trying. But something made me hesitate. Yes, I said carefully. Yeah, we can talk. We set up a meeting for Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop not far from my apartment. After we hung up, I stood in the garage for a long time, just holding my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Derek had called. Derek had apologized. Derek wanted to see me. It felt like a miracle, but something in my chest felt off. Some instinct I couldn't quite name was whispering that I needed to be careful. That 6 months of silence followed by a sudden apology was a strange combination. I called William. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear Eleanor in the background asking who it was. Stephen Arden Williams' voice was warm, welcoming, the way it always was. What's up, you okay? Derek called, I said without preamble. There was a pause. What did he say? I told him everything, the apology, the request to meet the coffee shop on Thursday. As I talked, I could almost hear William's concern crystallizing through the phone. No, that's good, right? I finished, but I was asking, not stating. That he wants to talk. Maybe, William said carefully. But Stephen, I want you to think about something. 6 months. He goes 6 months without contacting you. Not a text, not an email, nothing. And then suddenly he calls out of the blue with an apology. He probably felt bad. I said, though, even as I said it, I could hear how thin the excuse sounded. Maybe, William repeated. Or maybe something changed on his end. Something that made him need you suddenly. Be careful, okay? I'm not saying don't go. I'm saying go with your eyes open. Eleanor's voice came through in the background, and William said something I couldn't hear, then came back to me. Eleanor says to trust your gut, he said. But she also says to remember that you have people who care about you now. Whatever happens with Derek, that doesn't change. After we hung up, I sat with William's warning. It lodged itself in my chest, like a splinter, not painful, but irritating, impossible to ignore. The thing was, I wanted to believe Derek. I wanted to believe that my son had finally realized his mistake, that he'd finally stood up to Rebecca, that somehow we could rebuild what we'd lost. But William was right. Something about the timing felt off. Thursday came slowly. I spent Wednesday evening choosing what to wear, settling finally on jeans and a button-up shirt that Eleanor had said looked good on me. I debated whether to bring anything. Flowers seemed wrong, a gift seemed presumptuous. In the end, I brought nothing but myself and the complicated tangle of emotions in my chest. Thursday afternoon, I drove to the coffee shop, with my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The place was moderately busy, enough people around that it felt safe, but not so many that we wouldn't be able to talk. I ordered a coffee I didn't particularly want and found a table by the window where I could see Derek when he arrived. My phone buzzed, a text from Eleanor. We're thinking of you. Remember, you're not alone. Another from David. Whatever happens, you got this. Rachel had sent a voice memo. Hey, Dad, I know Derek called. Just be careful, okay? I love you. I sat there with my coffee and my phone full of people who loved me, people I'd gained by losing Derek, and I waited for my son to walk through the door. And I tried to reconcile two contradictory truths. The first was that I still wanted my son back. That despite everything, despite the 6 months of silence, despite William's warnings, part of me still hoped that somehow we could fix this. That Derek could be the son I'd always wanted him to be. The second was that I was no longer dependent on that happening. That I had a family now, a real one, a chosen one, and that no matter what Derek said or did, I was going to be okay. Those two truths sat in my chest, like stones in different pockets, weighing me down in different directions. I finished half my coffee and stared out the window, watching cars pass by, watching people walk past the coffee shop window, watching the world continue on like everything was normal when everything felt like it was about to change. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw Derek's car pull into the parking lot. The coffee shop was in downtown Austin, a small place Derek had chosen. I arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a black coffee I didn't want just to have something to do with my hands. Derek walked in at exactly the time we'd agreed. I recognized him immediately, but it took me a moment to process what I was seeing. He looked older than he should have. Thinner, dark circles under his eyes. His hands moved constantly, fidgeting with his wallet, adjusting his shirt collar, running through his hair. He hesitated before walking over, then sat down across from me. Hey, Dad, he said. Derek, it's good to see you. I meant it. Yeah, you too, he said. But his eyes looked past me at the door at other customers anywhere but at me. We ordered food we wouldn't finish. Derek got coffee and a sandwich. I got soup. We made small talk. How was Austin? How was work? The kind of conversation strangers have when they're not sure how to talk to each other. Then Derek started telling me about the business. He explained it carefully, like he'd practiced. The startup was promising. Good market. He was operations manager. Rebecca had invested family money. Everything was going well until it wasn't. We made some bad decisions, Derek said, stirring his coffee. I made some bad decisions. The market shifted faster than we anticipated. We didn't adapt quickly enough. And then Rebecca's father, he got involved. He started asking questions, demanding answers, and Rebecca, She blamed me. He looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. I lost my job, Dad, he said quietly, 2 months ago. And I haven't told Rebecca's family yet. Rebecca knows, but her father doesn't. I don't know how to fix it. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I just listened to my son tell me about his failures, and I could see how much it cost him to be honest. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. That sounds really difficult. Well, it is, Derek said. And Rebecca's not handling it well. She's angry at me. Her father's angry at me. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get out of this hole. He was looking at me with something that might have been hope, or desperation, or both. I wanted to help him. But I also recognized something in the way he was telling this story. There was a structure to it. A narrative arc designed to make me feel sympathy. To make me feel like I owed him something. On Derek, I said carefully, have you talked to a therapist or a financial advisor? Someone who could help you work through this? I've thought about it, Derek said. But I don't have the money for that right now. That's part of the problem. We talked for another 30 minutes. Derek told me more about Rebecca's family drama, about the pressure he was under, about how scared he was, and with every story I felt him building toward something, preparing me for something. He didn't ask outright that day. He was testing the ground. I drove home that evening unsettled. Derek hadn't explicitly asked for money at the coffee shop, but sitting across from him, watching his hands shake as he stirred his coffee, listening to the carefully crafted story about Rebecca and her father and the collapsed investment, I understood. He'd been testing me, preparing me, making sure I felt sorry for him before he made the real ask. I knew there would be another call, a harder one. And this time there would be no gentle framing, no carefully constructed narrative. Just the demand, naked and direct. That night I called Eleanor. You sound upset, she said when she answered. I saw Derek today, I said. For coffee. And I realized something. He's going to ask me for money. How do you know? Eleanor asked gently. Because I know him, I said. I know the way he manipulates. I know how he builds a case. And I know that meeting today was stage 1. He was preparing me, testing to see if I'd be sympathetic before he made the real ask. And will you be? Eleanor asked. No, I said. Because helping him with money isn't going to fix what's wrong. And somewhere along the way, I have to stop trying to save him and start saving myself. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's very wise. It doesn't feel wise, I said. It feels like I'm abandoning him. You're not abandoning him, Eleanor said. You're setting a boundary. There's a difference. After we hung up, I sat with that distinction. Abandonment versus boundary. For 30 years, I'd thought they were the same thing. For 30 years, I'd believed that saying no to Derek meant I didn't love him. But sitting in my apartment that night, I understood that Eleanor was right. There was a difference. And the difference was this: I could love my son and still refuse to be used by him. I could care about Derek's well-being and still protect my own. Letting go doesn't mean closing the door forever. It means no longer begging for someone to walk through it. The door was still open. I'd given Derek a chance. I'd met him for coffee. I'd listened to his story. But I'd stopped standing in the doorway waiting for him to transform into the father I'd always wanted him to be. I'd stopped hoping he might finally see me, want me, prove that all those years hadn't been for nothing. The question was whether I'd have the strength to hold that boundary when he called again. If you're still here with me, comment "I'm here" below. Let me know, will you give Derek a second chance? Or will you protect yourself because what happens next will change everything? I'm about to uncover the truth behind his apology. A secret, and it's not what I expected. Important note: the story ahead contains fictional elements. If you want to stop here, that's fine. But if you want to know what I discovered, keep reading. The second call came 3 weeks later. A Thursday evening in early June. I was watering the tomato plants Eleanor had helped me plant on the back porch when the phone rang. Derek again. This time I knew what was coming. "We're out of time," he said without preamble. No greeting, no pretense of small talk. The mask had slipped. "The investors are pulling out. If we don't have 50,000 by the end of the month, the whole thing collapses." I set down the watering can. "I can't help you with that, Derek. Trikitai, you're not listening. I need 50,000. Not advice, not resources. $50,000 transferred to my account by June 30th. The directness was almost a relief. At least now we were standing in the truth. "No," I said. "You sold the house. I know you have it. You have far more than what I'm asking for, and you're going to let me go under because you want to play therapist and pretend you've suddenly figured out parenting." I felt the words like small stones. They landed, but they didn't break anything. That was the strange, new clarity I'd found. Derek's anger couldn't touch the thing I'd built with Eleanor and William with Rachel with this new life. "No, that's not why I'm saying no," I said quietly. "Then why would you have money sitting around while your son—" "Because," I interrupted, "giving you $50,000 won't save your marriage. It won't fix the investment. It won't make Rebecca love you more or her father respect you. It will just delay the moment you have to actually deal with what's happening. I don't need your psychology. I need money. I know. But I can't be the solution to that problem anymore." There was a pause. I could hear Rebecca in the background asking what I'd said. Derek must have covered the phone. When he came back, his voice was different, sharper, more dangerous. "So Mom used to say the same thing," he said. "That I needed to handle my own problems, that she couldn't rescue me. You know what that did? It made me feel like she didn't give a shit." The comparison landed intentionally. He was giving me the chance to feel guilty, to flinch, to reconsider. It was the move that had always worked before. "Your mother was a good woman," I said. "And she was right. She couldn't save you. And neither can I. But here's what she never got to tell you, that's not the same as not caring. I care about you. I care that you're scared. I care that your marriage is struggling and your business is failing. But I cannot fix these things with money, and pretending I can would be a lie we'd both keep believing. So you're choosing Eleanor Patterson over your own son. Is that what you're saying?" The accusation hung there. It was designed to hurt. And it did, but not in the way he'd meant. It hurt because there was a kernel of truth wrapped inside the lie. I was choosing differently. I was prioritizing my own stability, but that wasn't choosing Eleanor over Derek. That was finally, after 56 years, choosing myself. "I'm not choosing Eleanor over you," I said. "I'm choosing to stop sacrificing myself to prove something to you that I can never prove. I left you once. I know that. I've carried the guilt of it for decades. But Derek using that guilt to make me responsible for your adult decisions, that's not family. That's just prolonging the hurt." "Hi, you want to know what hurts?" His voice was sharp, thin as a blade. "Knowing my father would rather buy vegetables and read philosophy with some woman he's known for 6 months than help his own son. I thought of the Sunday dinners. I thought of Marcus's laugh. I thought of Eleanor's steady presence and William's quiet wisdom. I thought of Rachel, who had stood by me even when Derek was demanding money, who had chosen to love me the way a daughter actually chooses her father, rather than the way a child demands he fix everything. Malcolm, then I guess we're at an impasse," I said. "Because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm building a life with people who love me as I am not as a walking checkbook. And I'm not going to apologize for that anymore." "Don't bother," he said. "Because you're dead to me. You got that dead. You don't exist in my life. He didn't wait for me to respond. The line went silent. I stood on the porch for a long time after that. The tomato plants were still waiting to be watered. The sun was setting behind the fence, painting the small garden in shades of amber and rose. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before the call, but I felt different. Lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying something so long I'd forgotten I had the choice to set it down. I picked up the watering can. The earth was dry. It needed nourishing. Later, when Eleanor and William came over for dinner, I didn't tell them what Derek had said. But as I set the table, as I heard William laugh in the kitchen, as I felt Eleanor's steady hand squeeze my shoulder, I knew I'd already made my choice. I'd made it months ago at a restaurant in Austin when a kind woman decided to invite a lonely stranger to her table. Derek would be angry about that for a long time, perhaps forever, but for the first time I was okay with that. That night I sat alone in my apartment and made a decision that would change everything. Eleanor and William had listened to my story. Eleanor had held my hand while I talked. William had nodded at all the right moments. They'd offered me a guest room, but I'd declined. I needed to be alone with this. I needed to sit with the weight of what I'd just learned and figure out who I was going to be in response to it. So I came home to my quiet apartment, and I sat in the dark, letting the full reality of Derek's betrayal wash over me. He hadn't just rejected me 6 months ago. He'd rejected me. Let me suffer. Let me believe I was the problem. Let me spend months questioning what I'd done wrong. And then he'd come back. Not because he missed me. Not because he loved me. Not because he finally understood what he'd lost. He'd come back because he needed money. The bitterness of it sat in my throat like poison. I thought about Derek as a child. I thought about all the soccer games I'd attended. All the times I'd stayed up late helping him with homework. All the times I'd put his needs before my own, believing that was what being a father meant. That if I just loved him enough, if I just tried hard enough, he'd eventually understand that everything I did was for him. I thought about his teenage years when Rebecca had started becoming a presence in his life. I thought about how gradually he'd pulled away, how he'd stopped calling, how family dinners became obligatory instead of anticipated, how I'd watched my son choose someone else over me again and again and again, and I'd accepted it. I'd told myself that was what good fathers do. They let their children grow up. They let them make their own choices. They don't demand love or loyalty. But that wasn't what was happening here. What was happening here was that my son was going to use me. He was going to show up with an apology he didn't mean, with words he'd probably rehearsed, with a performance designed to make me feel loved, so that when he asked for money, I'd be too emotionally invested to say no. I thought about the coffee shop, about the desperation in his eyes, about the way his hands had shaken when I asked questions he didn't want to answer, about the way he'd interrupted me when I got too close to the truth. He'd been planning this the entire time. Probably planning it since he lost his job 4 months ago. Probably waiting for the right moment to make contact. Probably calculating exactly how much time had to pass so that the pain would dull enough for me to be receptive to his apology. And I'd almost fallen for it. If Rachel hadn't called, if she hadn't had the courage to tell me the truth, I probably would have sat through that dinner this weekend and heard whatever pitch Derek had prepared, and I probably would have said yes. I probably would have opened my wallet and told myself I was helping my son, when really I'd just be enabling his bad decisions and rewarding his manipulation. I sat in the dark and I felt the full weight of every rejection. Every time Derek had chosen Rebecca over me, every time he'd made it clear I wasn't welcome, every holiday I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong, every phone call that never came, every moment I'd spent trying to be good enough for my own son. And I made a decision. No more. I would not give Derek 1 dime. Not 1 penny. Not $1. Not if he begged. Not if he cried. Not if he told me Rebecca was leaving him or they were going to lose their house or everything was falling apart. Because here was the thing I'd finally understood in 6 months of Sunday dinners. An unconditional acceptance love wasn't conditional. Real love didn't come with a price tag. Real love didn't show up only when it needed something. Eleanor and William loved me for who I was. They didn't love me for what I could give them. They didn't manipulate me into their lives with rehearsed apologies and false promises. They simply chose to show up for me week after week without asking for anything in return. That was love. What Derek was doing wasn't love. It was predatory. It was calculated. It was the behavior of someone who'd seen his father's goodness and decided to exploit it. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. It was too late to call anyone, but I typed out a text to Rachel. Thank you for telling me the truth. Whatever happens this weekend, I want you to know that I'm not going to help him financially. She responded almost immediately. Good. I love you, Dad. 3 words, no conditions. Just simple, honest love. I thought about how Derek had never said that to me in 6 months. Not once. No I love you texts. No genuine expressions of affection. Just strategic silence followed by a calculated apology. The anger I felt in that moment was clarifying. It wasn't the anger of someone broken. It was the anger of someone who'd finally seen clearly. The anger of someone who'd stopped making excuses for the people who hurt him. The anger of someone who'd decided that enough was enough. I sat in my apartment through the night not sleeping, but not restless either. Just still. Just present with the decision I'd made. By the time the sun came up, I was calm. I knew what was going to happen. Derek was going to ask me for money probably this weekend, probably with some variation of the emotional manipulation I'd already witnessed. And I was going to say no, not angrily, not bitterly, though I had every right to be bitter. Just clearly, firmly, with the kind of boundary setting that came from finally understanding my own worth. I didn't need Derek's love to be worthy of love. I didn't need his approval to know I was a good person. I didn't need to sacrifice my own well-being to prove to him that I cared. I had already learned those things from a family that had chosen me. From William and Eleanor and David and Karen and Rachel and even little Marcus, who called me uncle. I had already learned what it meant to be valued simply for existing. To be wanted just because I was me. And Derek's manipulation couldn't erase that. His desperation couldn't undo it. His calculated apology couldn't diminish it. Because the thing about finding real love is that it gives you the strength to walk away from fake love. It teaches you what boundaries look like. It shows you that you're worth more than someone's financial needs. That morning I got out of bed and I looked at myself in the mirror. And I made a promise to the man looking back at me. Derek Hayes would not get another penny from me. Not today. Not ever. He'd had his chance to be my son. He'd chosen someone else instead. And now I had a real family. And I was going to protect that family and myself by refusing to be exploited any longer. No more. Not one dime. Not one single dollar. That was my decision, and I was going to stick to it. I didn't tell Eleanor and William about Derek's call that first evening. I didn't know how to put it into words. How do you tell people who've shown you unconditional kindness that your biological son had just declared you dead? Instead, I went home to my apartment and sat in the dark for 3 hours. I kept replaying his words. Not the specific ones, I wanted to forget those, but the tone underneath them. The desperation mixed with anger. The blame. The certainty that I owed him something I couldn't give. What struck me most wasn't his rage. It was how familiar it felt. This wasn't the first time Derek had called with a crisis. This wasn't the first time he'd used guilt as a weapon. This wasn't the first time he'd acted like my refusal to save him meant I didn't love him. This was a pattern that had been playing out for 30 years, and I'd been so busy trying to prove I could be the father he wanted that I'd never stopped to ask, was I responsible for saving him? I thought about all the moments leading up to this call. Derek's resentment when I left Connecticut, his coldness when I called on holidays, his distance when I tried to visit. And underneath all of that, the unspoken message, you abandoned me and now you owe me. But that wasn't true. I hadn't abandoned Derek. I'd left a marriage. There's a difference. I'd tried to maintain a relationship with him even when he made it clear he didn't want one. I'd reached out. I'd apologized for things I wasn't sure I'd done wrong just to keep the door open. I'd spent years waiting for him to decide I was worth having in his life. And then I met Eleanor. Sitting in that apartment, I realized something Eleanor had taught me what real family looked like. It wasn't obligatory. It wasn't based on debt. It wasn't about blood or history or who owed what to whom. It was about choosing. Every day. Without keeping score. Derek didn't know how to do that. Maybe Rebecca had taught him that love was transactional. Maybe his father-in-law's pressure had broken something in him. Maybe his own shame about losing his job had made him desperate enough to use his son as leverage. I didn't know. But I did know that whatever was happening in his life, it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. The next evening I called Rachel. "Hey, Dad," she answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" I told her about Derek's call. I told her about the $50,000. I told her about how Derek had ended it. "You're dead to me." She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Dad," she finally said, "I'm proud of you." "For what?" Telling him no. "For protecting yourself," Rachel said. "For setting a boundary. For recognizing that you can't save him. That's not your job. That was never your job." "But I'm his father," I said, and I could hear the doubt in my own voice. "You are," Rachel said. "But being his father doesn't mean you have to sacrifice yourself. It doesn't mean you have to give him money you've earned or make decisions based on his manipulation or accept blame for his choices. Being a good father means knowing when to say no." After we hung up, I sat with her words. She was right. I'd spent 30 years trying to be the father Derek needed me to be, which meant being whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it. And when I couldn't be that, when I finally said no, he'd declared me dead. But I wasn't dead. I was more alive than I'd ever been. I was alive in Eleanor's Sunday dinners. I was alive in William's steady presence. I was alive in Rachel's support and understanding. I was alive in the small, quiet moments at the bookstore when I helped a customer find exactly what they needed. And that life, the real one, the one I'd chosen, was worth protecting. Derek had given me an ultimatum, and I'd chosen without hesitation. I'd chosen the Patterson family. I'd chosen people who showed up for me without requiring me to prove my worth. I'd chosen people who loved me because they decided to, not because they had to. The grief didn't come immediately. For days I was numb. Derek was gone from my life in a way that felt almost clean. There was no ambiguity, no wondering if I should call, no guilt about not reaching out. He'd made the decision for me. By the time Sunday came around, I was ready to be around Eleanor and William. I wasn't ready to tell them everything that would come later, but I was ready to sit at their table and let their kindness remind me that I'd made the right choice. As I drove to their house, I thought about Derek one last time. I hoped he'd figure things out. I hoped Rebecca would get help. I hoped his marriage would survive. But I also knew that none of that was my responsibility anymore. I'd finally truly let go. And in that letting go, I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for: the freedom to be someone's son without being responsible for their salvation. The silence after I hung up was different from before. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't hope. This was finality. I stood in the break room of the bookstore, phone still in my hand, and I understood something with absolute certainty: I would never hear from Derek again. Not a phone call. Not an email. Not a text message. Derek had made his choice, and I was making mine. I called William immediately. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. "Stephen, what's wrong?" "And Derek tried to use me for money," I said. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I said no. He got angry. He told me I was dead to him and hung up. There was a pause on William's end. Then, "Come over now, we need to be together." I drove to the Patterson house as the sun was setting. The sky was turning shades of orange and purple. Eleanor was on the porch waiting for me. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into her arms. "He tried to use you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said into her shoulder. And when I said no, he attacked me. "Then he did you a favor," William said, appearing beside us. "He showed you exactly who he is. No ambiguity. No more wondering. No more hoping." We went inside. The dinner table was still set. Food was still warm. Eleanor sat me down and put a plate in front of me without asking if I was hungry. David and Karen looked at me with knowing eyes they'd clearly been told. Marcus was asleep upstairs, thank goodness. "Eat," Eleanor said simply. I didn't have the energy to refuse. As I ate, I told them everything. Derek's initial call, his fake apology at the coffee shop, Rachel's revelation about his job loss and debt, and this final call where Derek had screamed at me and called me selfish and cruel. "He's right about one thing," I said, setting down my fork. I did leave. I did divorce his mother. I did move away and try to start over. Maybe that makes me a bad father in his eyes. "Stephen," Eleanor said gently. "But I'm done apologizing for it," I continued. "I'm done trying to earn his love. I'm done waiting for him to understand that I'm a human being with needs too. I'm done." I looked around the table at Eleanor, William, David, Karen. I've spent 35 years trying to be the father Derek wanted. I've spent 35 years trying to be good enough, worthy enough, present enough. And he still doesn't love me. He still doesn't want me. So now I'm going to make a different choice. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I choose this family," I said. "I choose you. All of you. I choose to spend my life with the people who truly choose me." What are you saying?" William asked. "I'm saying I'm done waiting for Derek. I'm done hoping he'll call. I'm done believing he might change. He's made his choice, and I'm making mine. From this moment forward, I'm fully committed to this family. To you. To this life we're building together." William nodded slowly. "That's the strongest thing I've heard you say, Stephen." Since that call, Derek completely disappeared for the next 5 years, right up until Rachel's wedding. For 5 years, he would not call. He would not write. He would not reach out in any way. For 5 years, I would wake up on Sunday mornings with anticipation instead of dread. I would drive to the Patterson house knowing I was wanted. I would sit at their table knowing I belonged there. For 5 years, Derek would choose silence. And in that silence, I would learn to live. Later that night, after David and Karen had left, after Eleanor had made tea, Eleanor and William and I sat on the porch. The stars were coming out over Austin. The night was cool and clear. "He won't call again," I said. It wasn't a question. "No," William agreed. "He won't. He got what he wanted. He told you exactly what he thinks of you. He probably feels like he won. Did he?" I asked. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "He lost. He lost you. He lost the possibility of ever having a real relationship with you. He lost everything that actually matters." I thought about Derek, about the 5 years of silence that were about to begin. I thought about how he'd spend those years wondering if maybe he should try again. I thought about how he'd probably never understand that he'd already had his chances, multiple chances, and he'd squandered all of them. "I'm grateful," I said finally, "for all of this, for you, for this family, for teaching me what love actually is. We're grateful for you." Eleanor said, for choosing us, for showing up, for being willing to be part of something real. That night, I slept in the guest room at the Patterson house. And as I lay there in the dark, I made a final decision: I would not contact Derek again. Not ever. If he called, I wouldn't answer. If he showed up at my door, I wouldn't let him in. I would spend the next 5 years, and however long after that, building a life with the family that had chosen me. I had finally learned the difference between family by blood and family by choice, and I was choosing the latter. The church was filled with light. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in gold and blue and rose. Rachel stood at the end of the aisle in a dress that made her look like the woman she'd become: strong, sure, beautiful, in the way that people are when they've finally arrived at where they're supposed to be. I stood in the front row between Eleanor and William, and I felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders like a benediction. Behind us, Marcus sat in his best suit, already squirming. Sophia was with Karen, too young to sit through the ceremony without a meltdown. The Patterson family filled 3 pews. My family. The one I'd chosen and who'd chosen me back. Rachel walked down the aisle, and I watched James's face change when he saw her. That's what real love looks like, I thought. That recognition. That choosing every single day to see the person in front of you. The ceremony passed in a blur of words and promises. I cried, and Eleanor squeezed my hand. William put his arm around my shoulders. When the priest pronounced Rachel and James married, the church erupted in applause, and I found myself cheering louder than anyone else. At the reception, everything was perfect in the way that weddings are when the people throwing them have thought of every detail. Flowers and string lights, a band that knew how to play, tables arranged so that conversation flowed like wine. Before the reception started in earnest, before the first dance, Rachel pulled me aside into a quiet corner of the venue. Her face was flushed from the ceremony, her hair slightly askew. "Oh, Dad, I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "What, sweetheart?" I invited Derek. Rachel had kept some contact with him over the years, texts, brief updates. He knew pieces of my life, just not the whole truth. The words took a moment to land. "Derek, I've been in touch with him for a while," Rachel said, the words coming faster now. "Just texts, checking in. I know you don't want to talk about him, and I respect that. But he's still my brother, and I didn't know if—" She paused, gathering courage. "I didn't know if he'd actually come, but I needed to invite him. I needed him to see what real family looks like. What you built here." I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not even disappointment. Just a kind of complicated love for this daughter who'd had the courage to make her own choice separate from mine. "Does he know?" I asked carefully. "About Eleanor and William?" "No," Rachel said firmly. "He thinks it's just our family. A regular wedding. He has no idea who's going to be there." I nodded, slowly processing this. Rachel was giving Derek a mirror, letting him see what he'd lost without warning him first. I wasn't sure if that was kind or cruel, but it was Rachel's choice to make. "Okay," I said. "Thank you for telling me." Rachel hugged me, and I held her for a moment longer than usual. The reception proceeded as receptions do. Dinner, toasts, the band playing songs from the 60s and 70s. Marcus danced with Eleanor, his serious face concentration itself, as he tried to match her steps. Sophia toddled across the dance floor and back victorious in her small journey. William and I stood at the edge of the reception area watching the crowd. "Rachel made a brave choice," he said quietly. "She did. Are you angry? I considered this." "No," I said finally. "Surprised. A little sad maybe, but not angry." "That's growth," William said. The first dance began. Rachel and James moved together in that way that newlyweds do, carefully, as if dancing with someone brand new. The band played at last, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath. When they finished, the DJ invited family to join. Eleanor pulled me to my feet before I could protest, and we moved onto the dance floor. William followed with Karen. David and his wife Karen, yes, both Karens, which Eleanor found hilarious, joined in. Marcus tried to cut in on Eleanor and me, and we let him, the three of us, stumbling together in a laugh-filled tangle of limbs. That's when I saw him. Derek stood at the edge of the reception pavilion, still wearing his outdoor shoes, his suit rumpled from travel. His face had aged in the 5 years since I'd seen him. There were lines around his eyes, a hardness to his mouth that suggested life had not been gentle. But what struck me most was the look on his face when he saw Eleanor, William, and me standing there together. Recognition. Not of familiarity, but of loss. He was watching his father, his biological father, standing between two people who held him like he belonged there. And he understood in that instant that he'd given this away. That he'd chosen anger and rejection over this. Eleanor's hand found mine. William's arm came around my shoulders. Derek's eyes moved from William to Eleanor to me, and I saw the moment when he realized that they weren't just random family friends. They were my family, the family he'd refused to be part of. He turned and walked away before anyone else noticed him. The dance continued around us. The music played. Rachel and James moved through the crowd, greeting guests. Marcus came back to me and demanded ice cream. Sophia fell asleep in Karen's arms, and I stood there between Eleanor and William, watching my life unfold exactly as it was supposed to. Later, when Rachel and James were preparing to leave for their honeymoon, Rachel hugged me tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For being the person who shows me what real love looks like. For choosing us. For never giving up on me even when things were hard." "That's what family does," I said. "And I know," Rachel said. "I learned it from you." I didn't realize Derek had entered the pavilion until after the family dance ended. He was standing near the bar, nursing a drink, watching us. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the crowded reception. 5 years? 60 months. Suddenly, there he was, older, harder, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, and shoes scuffed from travel. But what struck me most was the look on his face when he saw Eleanor, William, and me standing together. Recognition. Not of familiarity, but of loss. He was watching his father standing between two people who held him like he belonged there. And he understood in that instant that he'd given this away. I walked toward him. "Derek. Stephen." He used my name like it tasted bitter. "Or should I call you Dad? I hear that's what the kids call you now." "How much do you know?" I asked quietly. "Enough," Derek said, gesturing toward Eleanor and William with his drink. "Rachel told me some things when I texted her. Asked me to come today. Didn't tell me the whole truth, though. Didn't mention that you'd already replaced us. That you'd already found a new family." "That's not what this is," I said. "No." Derek's voice had an edge. "Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you got everything you wanted. A family that actually wants you. Parents who actually care. A daughter who treats you like you walk on water. Everything we couldn't give you." Krieg. Eleanor said softly, "We never wanted to replace anyone. Stephen came into our lives and we chose to love him. That choice didn't diminish anything. It added something." That's a nice story," Derek said bitterly. "But that's not how family works. Family is exclusive. You don't get to have both. Actually," I said, "you do have to choose." And I did. 5 years ago, after our last conversation, I chose this family because they chose me. Because they saw me. Because they didn't make loving them conditional on me being someone I'm not. Derek's jaw clenched. "You chose them over your own son?" "No," I said firmly. "I chose peace over pain. I chose people who would meet me halfway over people who required me to grovel and apologize for existing. I chose to stop waiting for you to decide I was worth loving. You abandoned me, Derek said, and for the first time I heard something other than anger in his voice. I heard grief. A young man who'd made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences. I set a boundary, I said. After you asked me for money you had no intention of repaying. After you called me with lies instead of truth. After you told me I was dead to you. I stepped back and I let my daughter maintain her relationship with you because that was her choice to make. But me, I'm done, Derek. I'm done trying to be enough for you. I'm done measuring my worth by your approval. Eleanor squeezed my hand. You've been gone for 5 years, I continued. Not dead, just absent. And I built a life in that absence. A real life. A family that shows up. That chooses me every single day the way I choose them. Derek looked at the three of us standing together. He looked at Rachel across the room, dancing with her new husband. He looked at Marcus and Sophia, part of a family ecosystem that had no room for his bitterness. I should have treated you better, he said finally, and the words sounded like they cost him something. When you needed me. Yes, I said. You should have. I can't fix that now. No, I agreed. You can't. But you can make different choices going forward. You can decide to be better. To mean what you say. To choose honesty instead of manipulation. That's all any of us can do. Derek stood there for a long moment, holding his drink, looking at the man he'd rejected, and the family I'd built without him. I noticed security nearby alert, but not intervening. They didn't move yet. Just stood there, present, observing, waiting for my signal or for things to escalate too far. I don't know how to do that, Derek said quietly. Then maybe start by going home, I said. Start by figuring out what you actually want, who you actually are when you're not measuring yourself against me or trying to use me. Derek set down his drink and turned toward the exit. At the door he paused, looked back once, and then he was gone. Eleanor pulled me into an embrace. You did good, she said into my shoulder. I'm okay, I said, and I realized I meant it, truly meant it. Derek's pain, Derek's loss, Derek's consequences, none of it was mine to carry anymore. I'd already spent 30 years trying to carry it. I'd already spent 5 years learning to set it down. This was just confirmation. This was just Derek finally seeing what I'd already understood. I was done. Rachel found me afterward. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I should have told you more about inviting him. It's okay, I said. You did what you needed to do. You gave him a chance to see. What he does with that is up to him. Are you upset with me? No, I said. I'm proud of you. You loved him in the way you could, and you also stood with me. That's integrity. Rachel hugged me, and I held her thinking about how far we'd all come. From that Thanksgiving when her father sat alone in a restaurant, to this moment where she stood beside me as I finally truly let go. The night continued. The band played. People danced. And I danced with Eleanor, and I danced with William, and I danced with my daughter, secure in the knowledge that I'd finally come home. 3 weeks after Rachel's wedding, I sat at the Patterson dining room table on a Sunday evening. The sun was setting outside the windows, casting everything in gold. Eleanor had made lasagna. William had opened wine. Marcus, now 7 years old and missing his 2 front teeth, was telling a story about something that happened at school that had everyone laughing. This was life now. These Sunday dinners. These people who'd chosen me the way I'd chosen them. After dessert, Eleanor asked me to say something. It had become a tradition, a small reflection on the week or the moment. I'd never been good at these moments, but I tried. For 35 years, I began my voice still. Even I thought family was something that came to me, something I was bound to by blood or circumstances. I spent 35 years trying to be the kind of father my son would be proud of. 30 years proving myself, believing that if I just worked hard enough, loved wholeheartedly enough, everything would be all right. But that never happened. Eleanor reached across the table and took my hand. I spent those 30 years looking for belonging in the wrong place, I continued. Looking for it in someone who couldn't see me. Looking for it in obligation instead of choice. And then one Thanksgiving, I sat alone in a restaurant, and a woman stood up and asked if I wanted to join her table. One moment. One yes. And everything changed. Rachel leaned forward slightly. I could see her eyes were wet. 5 years ago, Derek called me, I said. He didn't call to check on me. He called to demand money, $50,000. When I said no, he told me I was dead to him. He meant it. For 5 years, I didn't hear from him. Not a call, not a text, nothing. I paused, looking at each of their faces. Eleanor, William, Marcus with his gap-toothed smile, Rachel, David and Karen. But here's what I learned in those 5 years. Family isn't about biology. It's not about obligation. It's not about proving yourself over and over again, hoping someone will finally see your worth. Family is about being chosen. Every single day you're chosen, and you choose back. William squeezed Eleanor's hand. Derek had to learn that the hard way. Or maybe he's still learning it. I don't know. I hope someday he understands that I didn't replace him. I just stopped waiting for him to decide I was worth keeping. I stopped believing that love was something I had to earn. And I found people who loved me without conditions, without keeping score, without needing me to be anything other than honest. I looked at Eleanor and William. You took me in when I was a stranger. You invited me to your table when I was sitting alone. You gave me a place at your Sunday dinners, and over these 5 years, you made me part of your family. Not as an obligation, not as charity, but as a choice. You chose me. And that choice changed everything. Marcus grinned, showing off his missing teeth. Okay, Grandpa, you're getting sappy, he said. But he was smiling. I laughed. That word still caught me sometimes. Grandpa. I hadn't expected to earn it. I hadn't expected to earn any of this. After dinner, Eleanor and I stood on the back porch while the others cleared the table. The Texas night was warm, and cicadas were singing in the darkness. Eleanor put her arm through mine the way she'd started doing about 3 years ago, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You did good today, she said quietly, saying all that. I meant it, I said, every word. I know you did, that's why it mattered. We stood in silence for a moment, and I thought about the man I'd been 5 years ago. Alone in an Austin apartment. Eating Thanksgiving dinner by myself, believing that family was something that had rejected me, and I was too old to find a new one. I'd been wrong about so many things. Thank you, I said, for everything, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Eleanor squeezed my arm. We didn't see you, Stephen. We recognized you. There's a difference. We recognized someone who deserved to be seen, and we chose to do it. Later that night, after I'd driven back to my apartment and lay in bed listening to Austin Sound's distant traffic, the occasional siren, the hum of the city going on, I thought about Derek. I wondered if he was okay. I wondered if he'd found his way. But I also knew that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent 30 years carrying that weight. I was done. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. In a few days, it would be Sunday again. We'd gather around that table. Eleanor would make something delicious. William would pour wine. Marcus would complain about homework and show me a loose tooth. Rachel would be there with James, and I would belong. Not because I'd proven myself, not because I'd finally been good enough, but because I'd learned that family isn't something you're born into or something you earn. Family is something you choose. And when you're brave enough to say yes to someone's invitation, when you're willing to sit at a table you weren't born to, when you open yourself to people who open themselves to you, that's when you find it. That's when you come home. You've just heard my story, a man who spent decades searching for love in all the wrong places, especially from a son who wasn't capable of giving it at that time. I allowed myself to become a machine designed solely to feed rejection. If you're like me, if you're searching for acceptance from people who will never give it, stop now. Don't be like me. Don't waste the precious years waiting for a miracle from someone who doesn't want to change. Here's the lesson I learned, and it's simple: family is not blood. Family is choice. God doesn't send love through DNA alone. He sends it through people who see you suffering and decide to do something about it. God sends love through deliberate, daily, unconditional actions. And when you find it, hold tight. Because that's grace. If this story touched your heart, if you're also searching for family or battling rejection, please comment below with your thoughts. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories coming next. Important warning: the stories that follow will contain fictional elements crafted intentionally for educational and inspirational purposes. If you're uncomfortable with dramatic or psychologically heavy content, I encourage you to exit now and choose something else that suits you better. Thank you for staying until the end. This story was mine, and I hope it felt like a gentle reminder that you deserve to be loved the way God intended. The next story begins soon. I hope you'll stay for it.